how many lives might be spared if people were sharing that information.
It's like your home is not your safe place anymore.
Reserved, they're withdrawn, they start saying suicidal things.
But if somebody wants to inflict pain on somebody, they are going to find the means to do it.
But hurt people hurt people.
80% of school shooters statistically are also suicidal.
Melissa, if you'd like to just tell us a little bit about you and your story, and kind of share with us what you came to share today.
Okay, my name is Melissa Hanks Ketchel. My brother was killed in action in Fallujah in 2004. That incident put me into a situation where I'm involved in a lot of, first of all, people watching, and that leads to suicide prevention, which is where my heart and soul is at in a lot of places. And I've gone through a lot of training, classes, crisis intervention, suicide prevention, and threw myself into that world completely without any formal educational background. I do think that there's a lot of things to be learned just by watching people and interacting with people. And then my daughter was enrolled in Oxford High School up until 1 week prior to the school shooting that happened there in 2021. We moved right before Thanksgiving, and then the school shooting happened 2 days following the Thanksgiving break.
The timing there is obviously wild, right? So, and why did you guys move? Did you already know something was going to happen, or you guys just needed to move for other reasons?
We were moving because of my husband's job. So he is an engineer in the automotive industry, and we moved from Metro Detroit to California just because that's where the automotive industry is going. And as far as knowing something, the school climate was a little bit strange prior to the event. Maybe 2 weeks before that, I had gotten a text from my daughter asking if she could come home because they were worried that some kind of violence or school shooting was going to happen within the school because of a different child in the school system. It played a prank. I think it's a very rural area, and a deer had gotten hit by a car, and someone had chopped the head off that deer and thrown it into the courtyard in the school, and maybe spread some paint or blood. I don't know for sure if it was ever that there was also paint smeared, and kind of just it was an intense prank that had really unfortunate timing.
That is wild timing. Okay, so and that was a completely different kid. We know that for sure. That was found out who that was.
Yep, completely different kid. Yep, it was found out. He was suspended from the school, and during the same time, there was a dead bird found in a jar in the bathroom at the school. And that was right there. First there's a deer, and then there's a bird. It was later found out that the bird in the jar was left by the eventual school
shooter. I do remember now that you said that. Something about he had killed a bird and cut its head off or something, and had been carrying that around in a jar. I remember hearing that on a video. Done.
Yeah, and then he had put it in the bathroom at the school, and they had kind of narrowed it down to who was the person that left this in the bathroom, and I believe they had about 5 different students that it could have been after
they didn't know for sure
an investigation, and they didn't, and then he was one of the 5 suspects later, and that in my opinion, talking to the people at the school and all of that. Just, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there isn't a lot of information prior to a school shooting that is talked about. And I think it would be very helpful if across the board there was communication. So if every person in the school had every piece of information, then it would make it easier to make an accurate threat assessment of a student who is in any kind of crisis.
Agreed. And that I think is one of the things that everybody has been recognizing. One interesting thing I just heard, there's a lawsuit going on with the Uvalde shooting, and it's the family members, and they're actually suing for the first time that I know of. They're suing the company that manufactures the radios that the police used because they were so poor and cutting out and weren't working. So Yeah, I know, right? Like that's kind of a random thing. They're suing the police department, they're suing individual officers for not acting. All that we're expecting, but then they're also suing one of the manufacturers of the radio company, and and it just goes to show, like, even a breakdown in law enforcement of radio communication. Having been in the military myself and been the guy who had to carry a radio and do the programming and all of that, the key fills. It's so widely known that you don't expect your radio to not work, but at the same time, if it doesn't work, nobody is just blown away by that. And in a combat scenario, again, lives are on the line. You're literally going out into a combat zone with these radios. Now, again, I think we need to take the same seriousness with communication. And what you're pointing out there, I think, is crucial, and it's one of the things people aren't talking about, and that is the having information and then holding that information. If you're a member of the school or a family, like if you're anybody in the community who has information, it needs to become common that we're not trying to create a police state where we're all telling on each other, but there's a red flag or a flashing red light in this kid's instances, I think, from hearing all the things that he was doing right before the shooting. At any of these points of failure where people aren't sharing that information, it just, again, it goes to make us wonder how many lives might be spared if people were sharing that information. And again, the deer head, like, all those things are very off-putting. I also come from the country, and people would literally see a deer and like throw it in the back of their truck, and that would just be in their truck during work or during school hours, and you wouldn't think anything of it if there was a little bit of blood dripping out of their tail bed. But it's a totally different thing to then cut the deer's head off and then go stage it at the school to, just to make everybody upset or whatever. Of course, we don't know right now, but I'm curious if that kid who did that knew already that the tensions were high because of this kid who already was talking about school shootings and drawing pictures of guns.
That all happened afterwards, so I don't think that the two were necessarily related, in my opinion. Just the child that did the deer head in the first place, I think that caused the climate at the school to change in a way that had effects later, like, because everyone was on high alert for a false alarm. So a lot of the people were trying to talk everyone down, myself included, like, hey, let's be calm, it's not an issue. And then there was another issue escalating at kind of the same time, and I think the first issue and it not being a threat, everyone was still in let's get everyone back down to safety level, and I think that could have had some implications as far as everyone's mindset. And talking about what you said as far as not being in the community where you're so much as a tattletale on your people, but it should be more commonplace to talk about things or to use one of the programs that the schools have in place. I think in Oxford they have OK to Say, and it's a different program throughout different communities where you do indeed have the anonymous effect of being able to report things to the proper authorities. In my personal opinion, I think a lot of the time school shootings are seen as what can we do to prevent a school shooting, as far as a lot of things are seen after the fact. And it's not so much like we're training our kids on a daily basis, a weekly, monthly, whatever, to react to a school shooting, and not training them as far as mental health aspects to prevent the school shooting from a point of view, from a mental health standpoint. And I think as a community, every community should be a little bit more active in looking out for people. This 80% of school shooters statistically are also suicidal, and I think that stuff needs to be taken into consideration. And where we're at now, where most of the school shooters that have statistically, most school shooters either attend the school that they're at or formerly attended the school. So when we're doing all these drills, which are important in case something happens, we're also showing weaknesses in the system to the person that's the potential school shooter, or maybe glorifying it or showing them like this is what can happen, and making them almost excited about what they can cause, the havoc that they can cause when somebody's already having a mental health issue. Instead of simultaneously, we need to have some mental health. We need to be also training our students, in my opinion, on how to look for mental health issues and how to, like, even from a young age, not to put that on a child to save someone else, but to have safe adults that they can talk to, safe adults within the school community, if they don't have someone at home, but just make sure that every kid from elementary all the way to the high school level has somebody that they can go to and talk to and say, like, hey, little Johnny was acting a little strange today, or anything from a suicidal thing, or he has a tendency for violence, showing the students what some of those signs are, what are some signs that somebody is going to be violent. Those things historically aren't taught amongst school students, nor is it readily taught on how to, like, I know in most high schools, and my daughter is a junior in high school, there's a blip, like here's an okay to say program, or here's an anonymous tip line, but it's not practice. There's nobody showing them how. Here's an example of how you would use this. It's kind of like just a program that's out there that they're not very familiar with. It's not made accessible to students, other than they have the ability to use it, but they're not familiar with it. And then I think, personally, if some examples were given, or if we're like, this is how we use it, this is what we would do, this is what's going to happen on the back end, would maybe take away a little bit of the fear of the people that are using that program. And it should always be communicated that if a life, either a person's personal life, like suicide, or a violent attack, that's not tattletaling, that's not being like that's something that should always be okay to be talked about. You should always tell a trusted adult, or use one of those tip lines for an older student. That should.
Agreed. And I think you touch on a point there that I have heard echoed just in the podcast I've already had, which is the same sentiment of, right, we're telling kids that it's okay to say, we're saying, yeah, go ahead and use the anonymous tip line, but then it's not talked about again. And so in that moment, when you're a kid, I can remember very easily, I can recall being a high schooler and going through all the insecurities, and not wanting to make waves, and you just kind of want to blend in and not stand out a lot, right? And it's that time of your life where you're trying to form your identity, and it's rare that a kid is just, all right, well, I'm just going to go tell on this kid, and I think that he's acting like a school shooter. Okay, well, we've also seen where that's already been weaponized, and kids are using it to tell on other kids that aren't at all being, red flags or acting in any way, and they're essentially weaponizing it and using it as a tool to harass another student. So I think you're right. It has to come from the school. But again, it does need to be reinforced, by parents, just in conversation, where you maybe have a conversation with your kid once a month that, school shootings, if there's ever anybody who's acting weird, it's okay for you to be that one. It's okay for you to be the one who says to the counselor, who tells the principal, hey, this kid was drawing pictures of guns, and it really, again, I'm not trying to get this guy in trouble, right? But I am showing concern. This instance in Oxford, I think, more so than any of the other shootings, has taught us that in this instance, this kid kept showing the red flags over and over and over, and the teachers kept bringing.
The crazy part is that was within a 2-day period. So it wasn't there wasn't a, I know, because I know exactly what happened from being in the community, but it wasn't over a long period of time. There was like a 2-day period where this stuff happened.
See, that's not what we're thinking from the outside looking in from the reports. It sounds like this has been going on for a long time.
So it was like he had seen the counselor one time previous to the Monday before the shooting, and then again they were being called in on the Tuesday of the shooting. But it wasn't a big long thing that had been long and drawn in. It was all like right within a 2-day period. And again, I'm not an expert other than I talk to a lot of people through the military. I do a lot of suicide prevention stuff. I talk to a lot of people and I watch a lot of people. So without me being an expert, I think something that could be utilized within a school system is that we're not just looking for school shooters. And almost now, like, the word school shooter doesn't mean anything to the students, because Columbine was 25 years ago. They've all grown up in a situation where there's I think, is it 2.5 school shootings per year? So it's pretty normal for all of these kids to be like, oh, that guy's the next school shooter. That guy's the next school shooter. They don't mean that. That doesn't mean anything to them. That's just a term that they use. But I think that if we concentrate as a public, as a school system, on training the teachers, training every adult that goes into the school to look for mental health issues, we're not looking for the violent kid. We're looking for the kid that's sad, or that has, some kind of darkness inside of them that might come across as like loneliness, sadness. That stuff needs to be addressed. And it's just not really. And again, I know the schools, their job is to teach, but that is a large population of students together. And with all this, okay, it's one teacher for a classroom of 25 students, but those 25 students see each other and how they interact, and they can be taught to even just acknowledge differences. So a lot of things that I do from a suicide prevention standpoint is I don't always, the red flags that are out there aren't always like big waving red flags. There's just differences. Somebody that's always posting on social media per se, and then all of a sudden they don't. Like, that's a red flag. And that means we're going to reach out to this person. We're going to look for a discrepancy in behavioral patterns, and those are the people that we're going to reach out to. And and I'm not saying that it's the student's job to do that, but what I feel would be helpful is if mental health was talked about and made normalized. And like, my dog dies, I'm going to be really sad. And that might be something like that the teacher doesn't notice, but another student might be like, okay, so Melissa said that her dog died. Maybe we need to, talk to her. And without a way for students to get that information to trusted adults, that can't happen. So maybe like a survey system, like, every once a month, the first Monday of the month, we're going to have a survey. What have you noticed? Just a survey in their first hour every day, or something that makes it normalized, to talk about, I did notice that this was happening and this seemed a little strange to me. Or, somebody that's talkative all the time and then they're quiet, or vice versa. And if you're not in a position where you're paying attention to those things, then it might not be something that you notice or even know, like, I should talk about that. But a lot of the kids will notice that, or like there's always a quiet kid that's in the classroom, and a lot of people, teenagers, they're all a little bit afraid. So they're not going to talk to the quiet kid, because that means they have to go out of their comfort zone. Just different things. I think that school shootings can be prevented. And I think that as a nation, we're looking for ways to protect students when they're in an active shooter situation. And I think as a community, we can collectively have some kind of tribal mentality to protect each other always, and that will reduce the effects of school shootings.
I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. I think, right, a ounce of prevention over, right, a ton of, instead of trying to build schools to have bulletproof glass and all of these different inventions to be able to stop bullets or prevent shooters from killing more children. Right. It's identifying somebody who is and again, the loner thing is one of those things that I'm now learning is not necessarily always true. At Columbine, for instance, both of those kids were very active, and I don't mention names a lot, obviously, and I'm not going to, of school shooters. At the same time, the names of the Columbine shooters are so well known that it's impossible at this point to not know who they were. But the Klebold, that one, he was very, very active. He was great in class. Like, a lot of people liked him. He was always seen as a really positive, and this is from all the books, from interviews, from people who were at the school, students, people who have now, like, given 20 years later, are giving interviews about Columbine. What I think is interesting there is that what you said about it's maybe just the sad kid or it's the quiet kid. I agree with you. I think that's the thing that it's going to be more often than not is going to be the quiet kid, the loner who's kind of reserved or kind of he has a buffer around him where he's not really making meaningful connections necessarily. And that goes right to mental health. Why is that? And sometimes, you go to a school where everybody's kind of jerks to you if you're the new kid. And sometimes you go to a different school and a lot of people welcome you in. I went to both, and I ended up going to 3 high schools in 1 year, and I felt wildly different swings from one school to a different one in different states. What you're talking about with the teachers too, like the community, obviously we need to all stop being on social media, writing each other mean comments and hating the other half of the United States. And unfortunately, it's being taught through example. And that's the most profound thing, whether you're teaching something good or teaching something bad. Your kids are watching what you do, not what you tell them. And so parents can tell their kids not to hate other kids at school and to be nice to them, and then cut off 3 people in traffic and flip 4 people off, throughout the month. And you've just destroyed any credibility you had as a parent trying to tell their kid to be a nice kid. And again, same thing, like we all as a nation need to go into a mode of healing, and that's just not going to happen overnight, and it may not happen in our lifetime. Someday, hopefully, that does happen. What you can do, though, and the point of this podcast and what the message you're sharing is, you can be the person who starts, like, brings this up to the school board. Hey, we need to start having better communication, looking into the mental health side so that we're not teaching our kids run, hide, fight. Instead, we're teaching our kids, hey, if there's a kid who doesn't have a friend, befriend them. And this sounds so stupid when you're a high school kid and some adult tells you need to go make friends with the kids who don't have friends. I was that kid. So I'm not going to go try to befriend the other kids who don't have friends either, because I'm already friendless at this brand new school I'm going to. Then once I became more well known and I start playing sports, and now I've got a bunch of friends. Now, and by the way, I graduated in 99. I actually made our school's kids to watch out for after Columbine list. I was number 3. So there was 2 kids who were both, I wouldn't say friends, but I mean, they were guys that I would say hi to, and I've had conversations with them, and they're really nice kids. They both wore trench coats. They wore Marilyn Manson makeup, because Marilyn Manson was huge at that time. And so we associate trench coats with these crazy psycho kids. Who in their right mind would let a kid in a trench coat come? That was the fad of the day. MC Hammer pants were stupid looking too, but back in the 80s, or 90s, they were really cool. So, you can't just slap a label on it and say that kid is most likely to be the school shooter, because those 2 guys wearing trench coats were number 1 and number 2, and I was number 3, because literally I talked to them. And, and there's some other reasons, but it was just like, again, I was reserved. I was kind of quiet. I didn't have any friends my whole first year. Then I get into sports and I changed. But I changed for the better, not the other way around. And I think that's the important part. Typically, I say typically, I don't know of a single example where a kid goes from being, or any person goes from being withdrawn, reserved, quiet, stays to themselves, not trying to make relationships, friendships, and then switches to become, more outgoing and friendly. And that's a sign that they might be suicidal or squished. It doesn't. It's always the other way. If they're a normal person and then they switch to being reserved and withdrawn, by the way, this is the same exact scenario you're going to hear your whole life as an adult, because that's what you're looking for somebody who's going to commit fraud at your work. If you go through and get a top secret clearance, that you're going to have to go through a class where they teach you that other people who have a clearance, if they start asking you suspicious questions, you see that they pull back, they start being reserved, they're withdrawn, they start saying suicidal things, they have issues with any other problems in their life, like marital issues, money issues, things that can be exploited. Those are warning signs that not they're going to be an active shooter, but that they're going to betray the country and actually give away information to our adversary. So, but what I think is hilarious is I've learned the same scenario of what to look for. Now we're applying it to a school shooter, but I've heard this thing play out for decades as an adult for all the other things that you have to look out for.
I think a lot of it comes down to is that people that feel safe don't typically do horrendous things, right? So like you're talking about, even like as an adult within your marriage, if you feel safe within your marriage, then, or maybe just take it the other way. If all of a sudden you have tumultuous things happening within your marriage and you don't feel safe, like your home is not your safe place anymore, that's a warning sign. And then, different aspects of your life start to fall apart. So for children, it might be their parents are getting divorced, or they just don't have that safe place. Because some kids are loners. Like I went to high school to get out, right? Like I went there and I wasn't super popular. I didn't play sports till my senior year of high school. And my goal while I was there was to get done so I could leave and go find my real friends. Like I just, I knew those weren't mostly, I had friends, but those weren't my people. I didn't hang out with people after school. It just wasn't for me. But I was consistent in that same pattern. I still made jokes with people. I still laughed while I was there. I just was really just looking to get out, right? Like it was not the life for me. But the thing is that when there's, and it's hard to say, like to go tell a bunch of kids that are already within their friendship communities, like, hey, you go be friends with that guy. Like, I don't want to be friends with a weird kid. And I have children, so I hear them saying that. But it's also, humans are tribal people. Like historically, living alone in front of your computer is not how we were meant to be evolutionarily. So we don't have to necessarily be like, you must be friends with Melissa, but we probably shouldn't ignore her either, right? Like acknowledge people, make some eye contact, like don't treat people like they're invisible, because then they start to feel invisible, and invisible people make bad decisions. Invisible people are going to hurt other people. Invisible people are going to hurt themselves because they don't want to be invisible.
Right. And I think this comes to the one of the more powerful phrases that I've heard, and I repeat this all the time. I'm sure my wife hates hearing it at this point, but hurt people hurt people.
Right.
And what we see with this kid is that he's not being physically abused at home. Again, this is just from what's, the little short, like documentary style YouTube videos of people who are doing all the research and what's going on the news and those types of things. That's what I'm getting my information from. But he was just neglected, and that evidently, so you mentioned that everything kind of happened in 2 days. Mm-hmm. That's where everything that was the biggest red flags, warning signs, flashing red lights at that point are going on. That being said, I think, from what I've heard from people who've interviewed people who knew him, said, he's always kind of been like academically smart, but didn't apply himself. And one of the teachers did mention that he didn't, like they were doing a quiz, and he literally just wrote his name on it and just sat there and didn't take the quiz at all, didn't write anything on the page. And then they went to go collect the papers, and the teacher sees there's nothing written on it. And again, he already knows the answers to all these things. And this is from the teacher. He said, this kid is really smart. He's like, why don't you just write the answers down? I will give you a little bit more time. What's the issue? And he was like, no, he said something to the effect of, no, I'd rather, my parents find out that I failed this, or something like that. He was saying that he wants his parents to be notified that he got a 0. Anything, that's a cry for help from a child who just wants his parents. And this is
anyone to take a moment and be like, are you okay? How can I help you? Because he probably felt invisible.
right.
And
At his own home by his own parents.
And even within the school system, this was still like, from this particular kid, this is when you're still wearing masks every day. And the people, I think that we haven't taken that into account, like just somebody smiling at you and, like it being acknowledged. If you're not getting that at home, and then all of a sudden you're in an environment where you are getting no positive reinforcement through facial expressions, because communication, I think statistically 8% of your communication is verbally what you say. It's tonality and what's it called, like expressions.
Yeah. Physical. Yeah.
I can't think of what it's called right now, but being able to experience that and then not having that has to take a toll on people's mental health. And another thing, that where I live now, I live in Huntington Beach, California. My elementary age students attend Fountain Valley schools. They take mental health very seriously from a young age, and to the point that they teach the students when they're in second and third grade, fourth grade, how to recognize and express their emotions. And it's just such a small thing that they do, but it normalizes it. It normalizes the ability. I mean, a lot of, like, I'm a similar age to you. I graduated in 1997. I was born in 79. I was raised by parents who, we didn't sit around and talk about our emotions. Like, we didn't have warm and fuzzy conversations. It wasn't that I was abused in any way, but if I was sad, like, do something about it. Get over it. You want something to cry about? That was the generation that I was raised in. And now, while we're raising children, like, it's hard to teach what we weren't taught. So I think a lot of that stuff is coming across now that they're teaching things in certain school districts. Like, I noticed, I went to a parent-teacher conference at my second graders classroom last year, and there was a color code on the wall, and it was red, yellow, green, and I'm like, oh, what is that about? Can you explain that to me? And it was the kids at second grade, because they don't know how to process or explain what they're feeling. They have a color card, and they put it on their desk. And if it's just normal, I think there's a color for just, I'm fine, everything's good, and they leave it at that. But if they're a little bit sad or a little bit upset, they can change the color, and without saying anything, the teacher will know, like, to take a minute to talk to that child, or do you need extra time? Do you want to go sit in the the alone circle instead of having to interact with all of your friends today? And it's not coddling and making them, like I think we got a little hung up on that too. Like, oh, everyone needs a safe space. Well, maybe your community should be your safe space, so that we don't need safe spaces within the community. And the safe schools with the good community feel, those schools are not going to be the ones that have these horrific experiences happen to them. Because if you feel safe within your school system, or if there's a day when, let's say, my son doesn't feel safe, then he has safe adults that he can express that to, whether it be his mom and dad or a teacher at school, that is all going to help. So we don't need safe spaces. We need to all be safe within our community.
I agree. And I think that touches on another point, right? The safe space specifically. I think that kind of was, I'm sure it was a great idea to begin with. And what you're saying is all common sense things, but it's right. It's the extreme person who hijacks that and now wants to, take that and take it to an extreme level to where they weaponize it and they start using it as, no, this is our safe space, and anybody of not our race, creed, like they literally start using it to hate anybody that's not part of the people they want to be in their little club. And it's like the cliques that everyone hated in school is literally what you're creating in a safe space. You're trying to create your own clique and trying to keep other people out, that's the entire right, the opposite of what you're trying to do. Safe space, I think, again, because of the terminology there and the people that have abused that and weaponized it, I think it's problematic, because when I hear it, immediately that's what I think of. I think of these people weaponizing it. Same time, I think, just like giving it a different name, and just like, hey, this is going to be our little friend circle and whatever. And so you're going to go over there and it's like, hey, we're not going to talk about it. And I learned this as an adult too, because you're going to be doing this without labels. You're going to be doing this as an adult. You're going to be trying to include people at work. If you're a supervisor, you've got to get everybody on this team to be a team, because they're not a team yet. We just hired this person. They're brand new, and maybe somebody else is kind of new, and maybe somebody else just transferred in, and you don't know each other yet. And what happens quite frequently, especially if you're type A personalities, as typically people who come in the military and do, the special operations side, the active combat side, the aggressive roles, the places where those people tend to frequently volunteer to go. Those people are always going to want to be using their talent, and so it's going to create friction, and because everybody wants to be a leader, and maybe they're all great leaders. Well, you can't have 5 great leaders and no followers, because then that's just chaos and nobody's actually working together. So instead, what you end up needing to do is get to know each other. And it sounds so simple, and it sounds stupid when you say it out loud to adults that are in their 30s, and you go, all right, well, here's the deal. We're going to go bowling. And
Yeah.
why are we going bowling? Because we just need to do something to where we can talk like we're normal people. And then lo and behold, you go bowling. And turns out, actually, I was in a bowling class from 3rd grade to 4th grade. I'm just throwing an example out there, not me, but this kid's actually really good at bowling. And guess what? He can teach us actually how to bowl. And now the whole team has gotten way better at bowling, and we all hated this sport thing because it's not a real sport. It's whatever. Like, everybody hates on bowling, but then if you're actually good at it, it's kind of fun to just constantly be getting strikes and spares. So it's little things like that. Maybe they're not good at it. Just go to a park. Just be out somewhere where you have not other distractions per se, even, and you have to just start communicating with each other. And that's what I think with kids. You have to break down the barriers, because they will stay in their cliques, and you're never going to just tell them to stop being in cliques and be nice to the weird kids. And it'll never work. And I've already shared this one story, but I was nice to a kid who had some intellectual disabilities, and I don't know what all they were, but he had issues, and I don't know what all they were, but kids would pick on him, and he didn't bathe a lot. I mean, he smelled, and so that, when you're a kid, you don't want to be around the kid who's smelly, and so then I stood up for him one time, and somebody was talking to him and making fun of him or something. And I was like, hey man, leave him alone. Just, he's got enough problems as it is. And I'm standing there with my books in my hand, and the kid that I'm standing up for slaps the books out of my hands.
The same thing happened to me.
Not joking. I was so dumbfounded in that moment. I was like, what are you doing? And he like started like trying to make fun of me or something. I was like, all right, Russell. Sorry, his name was Russell. I'll never forget his name. I was like, all right, smelly Russell, I'll just let you be, man. And I just pick up my own books and walk off, and he just gets made fun of. I think, too, that's a defensive mechanism. And I think a lot of kids, that they get pegged into this, you are this, and they get to be known for that, and then they just stay that way. They could improve, they could change, but they don't want to be friends with you because you guys are making fun of me. So I'd rather just stay over here and leave me alone.
They don't like you. Like, there's this weird stigma that the popular kids, like, everyone should want to be like them. Why? Maybe I don't like you. Maybe I don't want to be your friend. I would rather sit alone than be friends with you. Like, I think in school is the only place in life where you're forced to be with people all the time that you don't like. Because honestly, if I don't like everyone at my job, I'm going to get a new job. right? Like I'm not going to stay there. And then in a school environment, you're stuck with these people for a long period of time, and everyone historically is like, you must be friends with them. Why? I'm like, there's a lot of things that we tell kids that we would never tell another adult, and that needs to be recognized as well. Like maybe, like I've always taught my kids, and I don't know what I'm doing. Nobody gave me a parenting manual, but you don't have to like everybody, but you have to be respectful of everybody in their model of the world. And, maybe everybody's parents have different abilities and different, like maybe, like I think another thing that isn't addressed very often, and this is a whole nother huge conversation, but the lack of healthy food options within a community and how that affects your mental health and in pretty much everything about you. And then let's say from like middle school, like myself, I will tell you right now that when I say everybody in a school system should be taught on mental health things, it be everybody, like from the principal, the admins, the secretary, the janitor, because the people that you are going to find as your people, my safe adult to confess to, someone else's safe adult to confess to, might not be, my homeroom teacher. When I was in middle school, I hated school. It was not for me. Somebody made fun of me one time. We were really poor. We didn't have a lot of money, and my mom was always too proud to, get any kind of assistance. That just wasn't who we were. I had a sandwich one time, and it was butter. It was butter and bread. And I sat down at the lunch table, I'm eating my food, and somebody saw this sandwich and ridiculed me. Like, she's so poor, that's all they have. So I didn't ever eat lunch again. I didn't go in that lunchroom. My everyday activity is I needed to buy time. That was what was important. My mom would give me lunch money, and my poor mother, she's trying really hard to come up with money to give me, and I'm giving it to other kids. Like, here you go, you want something, have this money. I would get in the lunch line, I would wait, I'd get in the end of the lunch line. So then I would go through the lunch line. I would not buy lunch, then it would buy me time. And then I would walk out the lunchroom doors and I would sit in the hallway. Sometimes I'd hide in the bathroom, but the only person that noticed me was a janitor. It was a man named Virgil. And like, I don't remember half the t-shirts I had. I remember Virgil, the janitor, when I was in 6th grade, who gave me juicy fruit gum every day. And if I smell it, I might cry. Like, because it was just like, he was like, hey, Melissa, how's your day? What are you doing? I would walk through the hallways with him just because he would recognize that I was sad. And he was a grandfather. I think he just worked at the school as a janitor for something to do, because he was retired. And he saw me sitting there, and he was the one person that was like, hey, like, let me pay attention to you. Let me not have you feel invisible. And so it's just like important for people in all aspects of a school system to recognize that. And then furthermore, to have some kind of a verbalization amongst everybody, because I wasn't a problem. I wasn't doing other things, but let's say I was, that my teachers aren't going to know that I sit at lunch by myself every day. The cafeteria, they're not going to know that. They see me go through the lunch line every day. So if there isn't some kind of like correlation amongst the adults that are responsible for these students, things can fall through the cracks. They might miss that.
Yeah, agreed. I know that's it's funny because I was raised dirt poor too, and my mom, they were able to, once I got to high school, they were finally able to afford like $2 for lunch. I never ate lunch either, ever. In all of high school, I didn't eat lunch. I saved my money because $2 was a lot of money. And I was like, yeah, I'm just not going to eat lunch. I didn't care about the food. I didn't care about being ridiculed. So I would spend all my time walking around the school, just visiting with different groups. And that's where I became friends with the stoners outside, and the hacky sack kids, and the kids who smoked cigarettes, and they were different from the kids that were the stoners. And so I became friends with kind of a little bit of everybody, and I would just spend all my time visiting with people. And I think that's why, again, podcasting for me is a no-brainer. And the fact that this is a thing now that I'm an adult, this is a career path, but it has to be something that you're very passionate about. And, I think just having conversations with ideas like you're sharing right now, some of these things kids can hear, and it can be something that they go, man, it'd be nice if that was real. And the reality is, we need parents, we need school board members, we need faculty to be in these conversations too, because they are the ones who are really going to drive that change or be the change. That is, it's used so often, that phrase is right, be the change. But really, like you just said, a janitor can completely change how you look at life, and it could bring you to tears decades later because you know that so few people were nice to you, and this one person was. And I've already shared it. I do this a lot, but there was a football coach who just asked me what I was going to do after high school. I said, I'm going to be a firefighter. He's like, oh, I'm surprised. He's like, I figured you would have joined the Marines or something. And I was just like, what? Like, nobody had ever said anything remotely like that to me in my whole life. Like, most people didn't think I'd ever be a firefighter because that's what other people who come from rich families are able to afford to go to firefighter school. And so that one person said that one thing. And then I graduated high school, and a few months later down the road, I just see Marines walking through the mall and go, I don't know what it's going to take to be that, but I'm going to try. And somebody believed in me. And so I'm still sharing that to this day because Coach Battles, and he had the coolest last name of all time. His name was Battles. Just said he thought I could have made it in the Marines and no one else did. And, that's like you just said, that it's just those people are not the little people at school, janitors, lunch ladies, bus driver. When you said that about who's the adult that a kid can talk to, man, bus drivers are the ones that you're stuck with, and you could go sit up front. Nobody else wants to sit up front. In the bus, everybody wants to sit to the back. And if you go sit up front every day, yeah, you could actually befriend the bus driver. And those people it takes a special type of person to want to drive a bus. I'd rather be a lunch lady. I'd rather be a janitor than to be a bus driver.
I always taught my children, like, no one person that I will not be merciful on you if you are rude to is the bus driver. They are responsible for the safety of all of the children while driving, while being disrespected, and while not making very much money to boot.
Right. And assaulted these days, they get attacked so often these days, it's ridiculous. Or it's just being recorded.
As parents, everything is not like someone else's responsibility. And I think that circles back to this conversation, is that as a community member, it is my responsibility to make sure that things aren't happening within a school system, whether that be through showing up at the school board meetings, asking the schools what the safety plan is, asking them how their school is a safe school, talking to my children about what happens at school. And I've always talk to my children about maybe looking out for other people. Not so much, they don't have to save other people because that's a child and that's not their job, but tell me, like my daughter, she's 22 right now. She's actually in basic training right now for the Army. She would be like, hey mom, so-and-so didn't ever eat a lunch. Can I pack 2 lunches? Because, they'll be embarrassed, so that I can be like, oh, I have extra. Do you want to share? And I was always like because of the food situation. So obviously I live a complete different lifestyle than I, like as an adult. My husband affords me a life that I wasn't afforded as a child by any means. And so I can feed other people's children and see how important that is. And that when you're hungry, you can't learn. When you're hungry, you can't be nice to people. Like people make jokes about being hangry without thinking. There are children that they cannot think about being nice to you. They don't know when their next meal is going to be. Or there's people that can afford food, but the lunchroom at a school, middle school, high school, like that's very cliquey. Who you sit with matters. And if you have no one to sit with, a lot of people would choose to not eat versus sitting alone. So I don't know what the answer is for that. I know, again, at my daughter, who's a junior here at Huntington Beach, there's a teacher and she just has like a food closet, and she's like, anyone that wants to sit in my classroom, she has to be there to do that. But like a lot of times, my daughter's like, oh, I was just in Mrs. Clark's room today, like for lunch, more days than not. And I'm like, who's all in there? And she's like, oh, she has like noodles and, just snacks or whatever, or they can go get their lunch and bring it in her classroom. And she talks to all of them. She makes it a point to have discussions with people. Like, I'm sure she knows about what's going on in my life because she makes it a point to ask. And everybody doesn't have, the ability to do that, but it's just nice that she does do that for the people. And I think little changes, there's never going to be an answer. We can't even speculate. We've been studying school shooters for a long time, at least 25 years. And then I know like in 2004, the CIA got involved so they can see like what patterns they see. But a lot of those things we don't get to see until after something's happened. So there's never going to be a one size fits all. This is how we're going to prevent school shooters. But if we can, as a population, as a community, do exactly what you say and say, this, how can I help? How can I be the change and make a small change instead of looking for somebody else to make a huge change? All those little changes are going to add up in ways that, we won't see an immediate ROI on. So, but we need to continue to do that, continue to look for the people that might need help. Maybe it's a super popular girl. She looks like she has a lot of friends and she's not eating lunch either. Or, just like, I think, again, food's my passion. I'm very passionate about feeding people. And I know from like I have 3 sons. One of my sons was diagnosed with autism twice. I do not believe that I know how to cure autism. I do know that if you met him today, you would have no idea that that was ever a diagnosis. And his life was changed through food. We took out all of the processed foods, like all of any, like, I know like there's trendy things like, oh, take out red dye this and whatever. Like for him, it was just he needs to front load his day with protein. He needs to make sure that he's eating real food, and his body reacts differently to that. And I had a conversation with him as an adult yesterday, and he's like, I've been getting really frustrated at work. He has a high pressure sales job, and he's like, I'm just getting really mad. And he's like, I started thinking about it. I haven't been going to the gym because I've been stressed out about work. I've been eating fast food because I have been stressed out about work. And he's like, I think I need to make sure I meal prep, make sure I make going to the gym a priority. And he's like, when I do that, my attitude's better. But he's been taught that since he was 4 years old. Look for these things. And within a school system, and I hate to say that because school shootings are predominantly in wealthy white communities. To think that within those communities, there's people that aren't eating properly, but that is 100% true. And when we look at the Oxford high school shooting incident, even if his parents are not coming home, not cooking him dinner, they're not sitting down as a family, they're not making that a priority, and he's just kind of fending for himself with whatever's in the house as far as an eating situation, that isn't helping your brain develop properly either. Like you need omega-3s, you need a lot of different vitamins that you aren't going to get from a processed food diet. Not saying that that's going to prevent anything, but it's not going to help when you're, not eating properly.
Right. And again, there's no one size fits all, like you said earlier, the food portion of it. I think that's something that, that's a taking it to the next level. I think when we think of the pyramid, we're thinking like, well, we need to stop the shooters from being able to get bullets into classrooms, and then we can start talking about mental health, and I think it's like you said, it's backward.
We're going to be able to prevent them from getting bullets into the classrooms. That's not in America, and it's not, and that. Not that shouldn't be a topic of discussion, because please make laws. Like I have guns in my home. They're locked up completely. My children never have access to them. They do not have access to ammunition. So, but if somebody wants to inflict pain on somebody, they are going to find the means to do it. And what we need to do is figure out how to help people before they get to that point, or to show them that there's more than that there's something in addition. Because if you're going to the extreme where you're going to kill yourself or kill others, you've given up on any kind of future. And there needs to be some kind of a systematic system in place where there is more than this. Like as a child, I said I hated school. I didn't want to be there, but I believed in a future where I would be out of that situation and I could build the life that I wanted. If I didn't believe in that, or if I didn't have like my parents worked, they were very busy, they were always working. So, but my grandma was always there. Like my grandma was always checking on me. My grandma was always making sure that I had clean clothes, that I had new shoes, like if I needed them. Not the best. I remember going to Kmart and being like, please, no, don't buy me those shoes. But like they were better than the dirty shoes. I didn't have a choice.
To say that my principal actually called me into and I never got in trouble. He called me into his office one day, and of course I'm thinking I'm in trouble. I'm getting called out of class, And so everybody's like, what did you do, Ryan? I'm Seth. I'm like, I don't know. So I go to the principal's office and legit, like, I'd never had a conversation with him ever. And he sits down and I come in and I was like, yes, sir. And he's like, yeah, have a seat. And he pulls out from his desk a pair of shoes, running shoes that he's already been using. And he's like, try these on real quick. I tried them on. How is this going to work if we didn't have the same size shoe? But it did, and that fit me perfectly. And he's like, well, I just buy new shoes, and I just kind of jog in them for a little while, and I see that you're on the track team, and you don't have any, track shoes. So if you want those, so that goes to tell me that my track coach had already noticed the shoes that I had were straight garbage, and they were going to fall apart very quickly. And he had told the principal, and then the principal looked into it. And it's just like the teacher talking about with all the food closet. That's what we need as teachers. And I don't mean to belittle anybody who's just doing their job and doing other things, but it's when you take another step toward not just reading what your job description is, checking off the boxes, and then going home at the end of the day to watch Netflix and live your life, right? School teaching needs to, again, we're not going to talk about schools paying enough, and I get that. That's a whole nother topic of discussion. But again, in any job, and I think all kids can learn from this, and that is, any job that you do, whether you're a janitor, whether you're working at Burger King, whether you are, just a teacher, you can look at your job and say, this is below me. And I think that's the biggest problem with the next generation that's coming, is people are looking at jobs where you're doing something menial and looking down on that job and going, well, I'm better than that, so I'll just hold out. I'll get a degree so that way I can just go in as a supervisor. No, that's still not how it works. Like, you still have to learn how to work with other people and how to lead. But you get into a position to where you, no matter where you're at, a leadership or not, whether you are just in a Burger King working as the cook, guess what? If you always help take out the trash before it's ever asked of you, if you help other people do meal prep, even though you've already done your stuff, somebody's making bread over here and you go and help them, like, that goes to, you got to have the energy to do that. You got to have the right. If you're hangry, that's not going to happen. It all goes together. And although you ate bread, covered in butter, my mom used to eat potato sandwiches. And she worked in a potato field picking potatoes in California back in the 60s and 70s. And that's literally what they ate. They would pick a potato, they would cut a slab off, stick it on bread, put mustard on it, and that's what they would eat. And it's like, of course that's not healthy to just eat that while you're burning thousands of calories out in it all goes together though. And you can see that where you're at. I can see that where I'm at because I've experienced it for decades, and I know what not going to the gym, like you mentioned, not eating real food and eating processed food, and that's not nearly as hard as people think it is. When I was at my leanest as a civilian, not in special operations, that was different because you got to work out 6 hours a day, and that was your job. But as a police officer, what I changed my diet over to just, I ate long grain brown rice. I would cook up a huge thing of it in a rice cooker, and then I would get turkey, lean turkey meat, which it seems like that could be kind of expensive. But then I started thinking, like, but if this is my main staple of food, I'm good, and I got good protein, and it lasts for a lot longer than you'd think. And I boil that up, and I would just put that into big tubs, and they stay fresh long enough. And then you just put different vegetables that you cook that day in with it. And I ended up I had tons of energy. Again, I was a police officer with like 3 other jobs, and I went to school full time. I was in college full time at the same time. How'd I have energy to do that? I look back, obviously, it's just.
And it's habits, right? Like, so if you're used to, I got to run to McDonald's, sit in the line, get the food, do this, that's your habit that you get into. My mom being a mother in the 80s, when like they pushed the cereal on us, they pushed Pop Tarts on us, like they were pushing all of that stuff like it was healthy alternative. Um, she came to my house. She was watching my children when they were younger, and I remember her telling. I was mortified. I was so embarrassed. She was telling other people in my family, like, Melissa has no food in her house. Like, bro, I have food. You have to cook it. You have to cook the food, right? Like, there's all kinds of food. It's just not readily available. But that being said, like, you get into that habit, like, oh, I can make, like, it doesn't take you very long to cook something. It just, you have to be in that habit, or just do a little bit of meal prep at the beginning of the week, something like that. And then the effects that it's going to have on your life. And like, you think like, oh, it might be cheaper. That I see these things on social media all the time, which are ridiculous. Like, oh, buying one McDonald's meal is so much cheaper than buying like this healthy meal. But it's expensive. Sleeping in because I feel like shit. Not having those hours in the day, because time is money. And if I feel crappy, or my health is bad, or I have to go to the doctor, or I'm going to need some kind of a medication, that is all expensive. So it's really, a toss up. And if, like, my kids, they always made fun of me. Like, I would make sandwiches and throw them in the car, right? Like, we go on road trips. We don't stop and eat, because then you're going to feel like crap and be not moving in the car. So it's like, here, and the stuff like, what do they eat a lot of? Like those little oranges that you peel. Like, that's like a road trip staple for us. Like, there's a bag of oranges in the car, like my car smells like oranges, but that's super easy and it's sugary, right? So it's not like something that you're eating every day, but that's a good road trip snack, or, something like that. And just like, food really affects your mental health in ways that we haven't, and again, I could talk about this all day, but as a nation, we don't study that. And like, sugar runs the world as far as the money, and it's just ridiculous. But if we pay a little bit more attention to that, and I think from a breaking bread standpoint, as a community, if you look at the people that are eating alone or aren't eating because they don't want to be alone, or recognizing people that don't eat, and like, that's just what I do that, so my children do that. And I think you can look for a lot of people that maybe need a little bit of love, and you can recognize it through food. One example, there was a teenager who unfortunately drowned in my daughter's school, and she was 16, and he was a friend of hers, and she was texting me from the high school. It was a horrific experience for everybody, obviously. And my daughter was like, the grief counselors are here, they're not eating lunch because they're really busy, can you bring them food? And I was like, okay. So I luckily, Oxford is a very small town. I went to the local diner and I said to the owner, hey, I'm going to take food to the entire staff because I don't know if they're going to eat. Like, what can we do? And she's like, I got you. We'll split the cost. I'll make all the food. I'll get it so that we can take it to the school. And we fed the entire we fed lunch to the entire staff at the high school. But like, that was us saying, like, we love you, right? Like there's so much I love you in food, and noticing who isn't eating, and then, and teaching kids to look out for other people that maybe aren't eating, and not, and again, I'm like, food is my thing. Like, that's my love language. But like, you can see so much. And then even just like the community of like, let's break some bread together and have a conversation, and make that more normalized.
Right, and I think that's something that something that I was thinking of too when you were talking about, right, breaking bread is that's the time in school you only have the lunch break. You're in class, so you're in class with these kids. That's it. You're not encountering any of your any other friends or any other of these kids who are lonely. But everybody, depending on your school, obviously, that some of them have, some kids are out from this time to this time, and then other kids go out, and so they do a graduated thing. But that's the time where you have to mingle with other people, and that's really a lot of times the only opportunity where you're going to have a chance to see a kid who's sitting by themselves, or just kind of out, just sitting there scrolling on their phone. In schools today, kids have phones, so it's easy to mistake a kid who is lonely as just a kid who doesn't want to be bothered, and they're busy. They're on their phone. Okay, but unfortunately, we also know that the more people spend, especially young people, high school age, and younger, spend their time on the phone scrolling and on social media when they could have opportunities to interact with other people. That's a clear indicator that they're going to have much more likely to be depressed, have insecurity, anxiety, all the things that kind of go with being an angsty kid and trying to figure out where you are in the world. So that time is precious. And again, you never know who you're being nice to that, just doesn't have any friends. And again, I don't want to turn everything into, I don't want everybody to come away from what we're talking about and think, well, I'm only befriending this kid so he doesn't shoot at me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want people to think that. At the same time, it's like what you said, as a community, if you have a good community, kids aren't going to commit suicide either. And this is a topic that I think, is a whole nother podcast, really. And that's just dealing with the insane number of suicides of elementary school age kids, middle school age kids, and high school age kids. Normally, I remember growing up, suicide is something that happens when you are in your 40s and you lose your big career path. It's Christmas Day and you've lost your family and or you're isolated for it. That's what I remember growing up and learning from other people and hearing. You just didn't think about it from military soldiers, right? Which is obviously that's one of the big pushes, so everybody understands. But now that we have literally school age children who are being either bullied online or feel like they're just isolated and nobody cares. And that despair is what we're seeing from a lot of the older generation now. And this is the weird part, right? Where phones are destroying both sides. They're destroying now the older generation where I was just listening to a podcast by a NYU professor yesterday, and he was going over the statistics of the men age 50 to 65 that are committing suicide. That number is spiked high, and it's despair. They're dying of liver, their cirrhosis of the liver. They're dying of these things, and then they decide, well, I've already destroyed my body. I'm just going to go ahead and go out instead of waiting for this cancer or cirrhosis, whatever it is, to do its job, so to speak. Or again, they've lost their family. They've divorced their wife. Their kids don't talk to them because they spent all their time trying to pursue a career, right? And then you go to the kids and you see that it's still the same despair. It's just that they haven't learned yet that life is long. And I guess for me, it's weird because I grew up, again, dirt poor. We didn't have anything, but grandma and grandpa were right down the road. No, I didn't have a good grandmother. I had a terrible grandmother, and she was super, super hateful. And part of the reason why some eating disorders happened in our family, because she was just super hateful. But guess what? Even her being hateful, she was still there to say something. And I was around somebody. I wasn't just sitting there by myself with nobody around, just bored out of my mind. And for kids, being bored and being left alone is one of the worst things. Having been a police officer and responded to a lot of kids being neglected, kids being abused, man, and we had foster kids when I was growing up, and the neglected kids, you didn't know really as a child growing up and having these kids that are similar age to you, which was worse, the kids who had physically been abused or the kids who had just simply been neglected and left completely alone. Because in a lot of ways, those kids, they were just unreachable. Like, you try to befriend them because you live together. They're your new, what's brother and sister. But that neglect is just something that's so hard to get over. And as we see, it doesn't get better when you get older. But kids need to understand that, life is a long, you will have a long life if you make wise wise choices and something that you've been saying about yourself and your experience. You just want it out of school. And I think it's okay to say that. And I think kids, if you're over school and you don't like it, listen, tell your parents that, and hopefully you have parents that listen to you and don't just write that off as, well, but you'll never get a job if you don't get. I get it, because if my kid comes to me and tells me, I've got a master's degree, I'm like, listen, I went through an extra 7 years on top of. Trust me, and I paid for it. I was working the whole time. It's not fun, but it gets so much better when you actually are studying things you want to study, and you get to do what you want to do work-wise once you get out of this. Let's power through this, and let's get you in a sport that you enjoy. And yeah, math is boring right now, or you don't understand it, or English is boring, or you don't understand whatever it is that you don't like about that class. Just, you got to power through it. And I went from getting C's and D's in school to straight A's. My senior year, I made straight A's. I wasn't smarter. The whole thing was, I didn't get smarter from junior year, from sophomore year to senior year. I gave a crap because I had something I looked forward to doing after classes were over, and I went to track practice, football
and
practice.
You have to have good grades to maintain.
You have to have good grades. No, but did I need straight A's? Could I still have gotten by with C's? Yes, but at that point, you know that you're working towards something, and it's just like it's a compound of good. The compound effect of you getting involved in your community, of you getting involved in sports, of you getting, and it covers everything, right? Again, we were just talking about despair and suicide. That's literally the same thing that he says. You got to get involved in your community. You have to have a family around you. You have to have friends that are close. You have to be connected. And that's the thing that I think is the one thing we can all agree on. Everybody needs to be connected to another human being or human beings, to have eye contact, to have dialogue, and that gives you oxytocin. It compounds all the good things.
For myself personally, as a child, like my family, like my dad worked for a union, my mom was a factory worker. So it didn't matter if I dropped out of school when I was 16, because that was going to be my life. Nobody, it's not that they didn't care about me, but that was what they knew. That was what you do. So if I got all bad grades, nobody cared. And then when I was junior, the beginning of the junior year, you could get out of class if you took the ACT. And I was like, good, I hate school anyway, so I'm going to get out of this class and take this ACT. So you could get out and do like the prep work. And so I took the ACT test, and I got like the third highest grade in the school. And I got all E's, like not kidding. Like if you looked at my 10th grade report card, I had 6 classes. I had 5 E's and 1 A, because I also took art, which I liked. So I had 2 of my teachers, my government teacher and my English teacher, got together, and they were like, what is this? Like, so all of a sudden it wasn't acceptable for me to like do half-ass work anymore. They made it a point to be like, listen, you're going to need to go ahead and get some better grades. So it kind of taught me from experience that everybody needs somebody to not disappoint. Like I needed, because now that they knew I was messing around, they would be disappointed if I didn't do well. Whereupon my mom knew I was smart. She just it didn't matter to her if I got good grades or bad grades, because I was going to go and work in a factory. That was a good job. You had good insurance. It was very stable. So good grades didn't mean anything. I just needed to get through school. I could drop out when I was 16 if I wanted to. Both of my parents had dropped out of high school. So it was just like, it was fine. Whatever I wanted to do was fine. But as soon as I had somebody who was like, hey, looks like you got a C on this, what's going on? Like, I was a little lazy. Like, when I had somebody that I did not want to see the disappointment on their face, like, that for me made such a huge difference. And I wouldn't have known that if I didn't have that experience. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, I really want my mom to be proud of me for getting a good grade. Well, my mom wouldn't have been any more proud of me for getting a good grade or a bad grade. Nothing against like her parenting. It just wasn't something that was important to her. She knew, like, you're smart, you're going to be fine. But then when I had somebody that was possibly going to be disappointed in me, that made a huge difference in who I was academically.